Adana's hands trembled as she scrubbed the raw meat in the calabash. It was the middle of the night. The compound was asleep, but the creature in the forest was awake. It was always awake. She poured the goat milk over the flesh, thick, white milk that steamed in the darkness, and the meat seemed to drink it in, to absorb it, to glow with an inner light that should not exist. Her husband's voice came from the hut behind her. He was calling for her. He was always calling for her now, but she could not stop. Not yet. If she stopped, the hunger would return, and if the hunger returned, it would come to the village. It would come for the children first, the smallest ones, the ones with the brightest spirits, the ones who had not yet learned to be afraid. She was thin now, her body like a dried palm frond bending in the Harmattan wind. Her wrapper hung loose around her waist. Her head wrap was dull, no longer bright with the indigo dye it once held. The beads she had worn around her neck, the coral beads that had belonged to her mother. She had sold them for money to buy meat. Her eyes, which had once been bright as polished bronze, were now hollow. They were the eyes of someone who had seen to the bottom of the world and found only darkness there. The women at the market had stopped greeting her. Even her own mother turned away when she passed, as if shame was something that could travel on the wind and touch her if she got too close. But Adana could not afford their judgment. She could not afford their pity or their fear. She had something to do. Every night at midnight, she had something to do. She washed the meat in the milk. The milk turned pink, then red. She washed it again. She whispered words that came from somewhere deep, somewhere old, somewhere that had never been touched by sunlight. Obi's voice came again. It was no longer the voice she remembered. It was deeper. There was something underneath it, something that rumbled like distant thunder. But she had to keep washing the meat. She had to keep feeding the hunger. Adana had been born in the hamlet of Umane, in a time when the rains came heavy and the yam fields grew fat with promise. Her mother said she was a blessing sent from the ancestors themselves. Her father never smiled when he looked at her. He was a proud man, and his pride made him silent. She was beautiful in those days, so beautiful that merchants from the city came with gifts of cloth from beyond the known world, with beads of amber and jade, with silver that caught the light like water. Men came from 3 villages away, bringing bride price proposals. Each one was turned away. Her father said she was waiting for someone worthy, but Adana knew the truth. Her father was waiting for someone who would bring enough wealth to make him a man of power, someone who would raise his status so that even the elders would bow when they greeted him. The someone came when she was 16 seasons old. His name was Obi, and he was a hunter. His skin was the color of dark earth that has been blessed by rain. His hands were strong from pulling arrows from the bow, from wrestling boar, from climbing into the highest trees to catch wild honey. When he first saw Adana at the well, gathering water with the other women, he forgot how to speak. His hands forgot how to move. He simply stood there, watching her move the rope down into the darkness and bring it back full, watching the water catch the light as she poured it into the calabash. She felt his eyes. She had felt many eyes before, but this was different. She felt him seeing not just her beauty, but something deeper, something inside. She smiled. Her father demanded bride price that was truly impossible. 3 bolts of the finest cloth from the city of traders, the cloth that cost more than a man's yearly hunting yield. A sack of salt from the salt mines to the east, salt so white it looked like captured moonlight. 7 goats, all of them healthy, all of them strong enough to survive the journey to his compound. Obi was not a wealthy man, but he worked. He hunted through the rains, his body marked with scratches from thorns and the claws of animals. He slept in the forest with nothing but his knife and his determination. He sold ivory tusks to merchants. He traded honey and pelts. For 2 full seasons, he gathered the bride price, piece by piece, gift by gift. When he finally brought everything to her father's compound, her father wept, but the tears were not happy. He wept as if his daughter was already dead, as if this moment was the ending of something precious that could never be restored. "You are taking away the light of my eyes," her father said to Obi. His voice was broken. "You are taking away the reason the sun rises in my compound." But he accepted the bride price. He accepted all of it. On the morning of their marriage, Adana wore a wrapper of deep indigo, so dark it looked like the night sky itself had been torn and wrapped around her body. Beads of coral hung around her neck, each one warm against her skin. 7 different braids adorned her head, each one taking her mother most of the morning to complete. The finest cloth makers in the village had braided her hair, and each braid was a work of art. The women of the village gathered to watch her walk to Obi's compound. They sang songs that made the air vibrate. They clapped in rhythm. They said she was the most beautiful bride they had ever seen. They said that the spirits themselves had blessed this union. But even as they sang, one old woman, a healer who lived at the edge of the village, in a dwelling that seemed to exist in shadows, did not clap. She watched Adana pass with eyes that were ancient and knowing. Then she touched something hidden beneath her wrapper, a charm, a protection made of herbs and bone and words spoken long ago, and she whispered words that the other women could not hear. "Guard yourself, child," the old woman whispered. "Guard yourself against the hunger that hides in the forest. Guard yourself against the darkness that wears a human face." No one heard her words but the wind. For 3 seasons, Adana and Obi were happy. In the mornings, she would wake before the sun touched the sky. She would prepare his food with her own hands. She pounded yam until it was smooth as silk. She made palm oil soup that was rich and red, filled with meat and peppers that made the tongue dance. She prepared cassava bread and fried plantains. He would eat everything she made, and then he would sit on the stool outside their hut, and she would comb his hair, working the comb through the braids with her fingers. He would speak about the day ahead. He would tell her about the animals he would hunt. He would say her name over and over, as if the sound of it was music that made his life complete. At night, he would return with game. Sometimes a deer, its eyes still holding the memory of the moment the arrow found its heart. Sometimes a wild pig, massive and heavy, requiring 3 men to carry it. Sometimes guinea fowl with feathers still warm from life. She would clean his kill with skill, removing the hide, preparing the meat. She would cook it in the fire, and they would eat together, sitting close, their bodies warm from the flames. The fire would dance, and they would talk, and then they would retreat into their hut, and their bodies would press together in the darkness, and life was good. In the 4th season, everything changed. Obi came home from the forest one afternoon, and he was not walking like a hunter. He was not walking with the confidence of a man who had conquered the wilderness. He was walking like a man who had seen something that had broken him, something that had reached into his bones and shaken them. His wrapper was torn in 3 places. His face was marked with scratches, deep scratches that had not come from thorns. His arms bore marks that looked like claws, and his eyes were the eyes of someone who had escaped something that should have killed him, something that had been hunting him. Adana brought him water. She brought him food. She tried to tend to his wounds, but he would not eat. He would not speak for hours. He simply sat by the fire, staring at the flames as if they held answers to questions he could not ask. "What happened?" Adana whispered finally. Tell me what you saw." Obi's hands shook as he answered her. "I went to the place beyond the sacred trees, the place where the hunters do not go. I was following a deer, tracking it deeper and deeper into the forest. I was so focused on the hunt that I did not notice the silence, the complete silence. There were no birds. There were no insects. There was nothing but my breathing and my footsteps." He stopped. He could not continue. "And then," Adana pressed, "I heard a sound," he whispered. "A sound like nothing I have ever heard. A sound like something that has not eaten in 1,000 seasons. And it was calling me. I knew with every fiber of my body that if I did not run, it would find me. It would devour me. It would consume me from the inside out, eating me not just with teeth, but with something else, something that reaches beyond flesh." He never went to that part of the forest again, but the thing that lived there had seen him, and it had marked him. 2 weeks after the day Obi came home broken, the animals in the village began to die. First, Obi's neighbor had 6 goats in a pen made of strong wood. One morning the goats were simply gone, not stolen. They had been taken in the night. The pen bore long scratches, as if something with claws as large as a man's fingers had reached down and simply taken them. Then the chickens began to vanish. Then a young pig that had been kept in the compound of the chief's son. It was a massive animal, valuable, meant to be fattened for the harvest celebration. One night it was gone. The elders gathered under the great tree, the oldest tree in the hamlet, the tree that had stood since before anyone's great-grandmother was born. They gathered under its wide branches and spoke in grave voices that carried the weight of truth. "The spirits are hungry," one elder said. His name was Ezeagu, and he was the oldest among them, his skin marked with lines like a map of all the seasons he had lived. "Something has been angered. We must make offerings." They brought kola nuts to the shrine of the ancestors. They poured palm wine on the earth. They slaughtered a goat and left its meat at the edge of the forest, hoping the hunger would be satisfied. The next morning, the meat was gone, but something else had been left behind. A mark, a sign. 3 scratches, deep as knives, burned into the bark of the nearest tree. A woman named Neka came to Adana's compound. She had known Adana since before the bride price was paid. They had played together as children at the river. But now, Neka was not coming as a friend. She was coming because she had nowhere else to go. She held her wrapper close around her as she spoke. Her face was pale. "My brother has gone missing," Neka said, her voice shaking. "He went to the forest to gather palm wine. He left at dawn. He told me he would return before the sun reached its highest point. He did not return." Adana brought her water. Perhaps he found a good place to tap and stayed longer than expected. "No," Neka said. "I searched for him. I went to all the places where he usually taps. He was not there. And then I found his calabash. It was on the ground, spilled, and there were scratches around it, deep scratches, the kind of scratches that could only come from—" She could not finish. "The elders say," Neka continued, "that the hunger has learned to call people to it. It does not need to hunt anymore. It calls and they go, like sleep, like a dream they cannot refuse. They go into the forest and they do not return." Neka's brother was found 3 days later at the edge of the forest. He was alive, but something had changed in him. His skin had become thin, almost transparent. You could see his bones beneath, and the bones seemed to be glowing faintly, as if something inside him was burning him from within. He did not speak anymore. He did not eat. He simply sat and stared at the forest, as if waiting for something to call him again. Obi began to change. It started with his appetite. He would eat the meat Adana prepared, meat she had spent hours cleaning, cooking, seasoning with the finest herbs. He would eat all of it, and then his eyes would close, and he would make a sound, not a sound of satisfaction, a sound of pain, a sound like hunger that grows larger even as it is fed. "More," he would say. "I need more." She would prepare more. She would cook through the night sometimes. She would spend money they could not afford to spend, buying meat from the traders at the market. They began to look at her strangely when she came. The prices rose. One trader actually spat after she left. Then came the dreams. He would wake in the night screaming. Not words, pure sound. Adana would hold him, and he would sweat so much that she would have to wash his wrapper and spread it in the moonlight to dry. He would speak in the dreams. He would say words that did not make sense. Words that sounded like they came from somewhere very deep, somewhere dark and old. "It is calling me," he would whisper in the dark. "It is calling me to come back. It says it made a mistake. It says it marked me, but did not take me. It says it is waiting. It says it is so hungry. It says the hunger is eating itself from the inside." Adana was afraid, but she did not know what to do. She simply held him, night after night, and listened to him speak about the hunger that was calling him deeper into the forest. Then, one night, when Obi was asleep, a woman came to the compound. It was the old healer, the one who had not clapped at Adana's wedding. She moved like smoke, barely making a sound. She found Adana grinding grain in the courtyard, and she sat beside her without being asked. "You are feeding him," the old woman said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the certainty of someone who had seen many things in many seasons. Adana looked up. The healer's eyes were ancient. They were the eyes of someone who had seen the world before the villages were built, before the rivers settled into their beds. "I am feeding my husband," Adana said slowly. "He is hungry. He needs to eat." "No," the healer said. Her voice was like wind through dry grass. "He is not your husband anymore. Something has taken him. It has marked him. It is using him as a vessel, and every time you feed him meat, every time you give him flesh that was living, you are feeding the thing inside him. You are making it stronger." Adana's hands stopped moving in the grain. The world seemed to tilt. "What do you mean? What do you mean he is not my husband?" The healer leaned close, Her breath smelled like herbs and smoke. There is a hunger in the forest. It is older than the oldest stones. It was not always hungry. Once it was full. Once it rested. But something broke the agreement. Someone fed it something sacred, something that should never have been meat. A mother fed it her firstborn child to save the village from famine. But hunger does not work that way. Hunger is never satisfied by being fed. Hunger only grows, and now it lives in the spaces between the world and the spirit world. It reaches through people. It marks them with its hunger, and if we do not stop it, it will consume the village. It will consume us all. How do I stop it? Adana asked, her voice barely a whisper. You must feed it, the healer said, but not with meat taken from living things. You must feed it with what it truly hungers for. And then you must understand. Understanding is the only thing that can break a hunger that is endless. What does it hunger for? Adana whispered. The healer did not answer. She stood and walked away, disappearing into the darkness as if the night itself had swallowed her whole. At the market the next day, everything changed. Obi had gone to the forest with the hunters, though he moved now like a man in a dream. Adana was at the market with the other women, buying palm oil and salt. She was haggling with a trader about the price of cloth when she noticed the women watching her. They were not looking at her with the kindness they had shown before her wedding. They were looking at her with something else, something that looked like pity, something that looked like fear, something that looked like certainty that she was responsible for what was happening. One woman, Chinyere, who had been her friend since childhood, who had braided her hair on her wedding day, turned away when Adana approached. Another, Ebele, whispered something to her neighbor, and both of them laughed. It was the kind of laugh that cuts like broken glass. What is the matter? Adana asked Chinyere, her voice steady, though her heart was breaking. Chinyere would not look at her. She looked at the ground instead, as if shame was something that could be caught from direct eye contact. Nothing, she said. Only, my husband says that Obi goes to the forest less often now. My husband says that Obi seems sick. My husband says that maybe Obi is cursed. My husband says... She trailed off. Says what? Adana insisted. She needed to know. She needed to hear the accusations directly. My husband says that maybe the hunger has come not just for the animals, but for the compounds. Maybe it is already inside someone. Maybe it is inside your compound. Adana felt the market stop. She felt all the eyes turn toward her. The women moved away slightly, creating space around her as if she was something contaminated. She was no longer one of them. She was something to be cautious of. She was something dangerous. That night, when Obi returned from the forest, he was carrying a deer. It was large and beautiful, its coat shining in the firelight. It was still warm. He laid it at her feet without speaking, and she could see that his hands were shaking with something that was not cold. Cook it, he said. His voice had changed. It was deeper now. There was something underneath it, something ancient and hungry, something that did not belong in a human throat. Adana prepared the meat. She cooked it carefully, the way her mother had taught her, the way her grandmother had taught her mother. But as she cooked, something whispered to her. It was not a voice she heard with her ears. It was a voice she heard in the deepest part of her mind. It was soft and persuasive and absolutely terrifying. It said, "This is not enough. This is never enough. You must feed the hunger. You must keep feeding. You must feed it every night until it understands that it is cared for. You must feed it until it loves you. You must feed it with your own hands." She gave Obi the meat. He ate it, and then he looked at her with eyes that were not his eyes anymore. They were black, completely black, like two holes leading into somewhere very deep. "More," he said. "Feed me more." For 40 days and 40 nights, Adana washed meat in milk at midnight. The village did not see her. She did not come to the market anymore. She did not come to the river. She did not come to the ceremonies and gatherings. She disappeared from the daily life of the hamlet. But at midnight, every midnight, she went to the courtyard of her compound. She lit a fire. She gathered meat, goat meat, sometimes deer meat that Obi brought her, sometimes meat from traders who sold it to her without meeting her eyes. She brought milk from the early morning's milking, milk that was still warm from the cow's body, and she washed the meat in milk. She washed it carefully, as if each motion was a prayer, as if each movement of her hands was a conversation with something that lived in the spaces between worlds. She whispered words that came from somewhere deep in her bones, Words she did not know she knew. Words that sounded like they had been waiting in her blood for generations. "I am offering," she whispered. "I am surrendering. I am giving you what you hunger for, not flesh, not blood. Take my choice. Take my will. Take my future. Take everything I have that makes me myself. But leave this village. Leave these people. Let them live. Let the children live." As she spoke, the meat began to change. It began to glow. And the milk began to glow. And her hands began to glow with a light that was not reflected from the fire. And she felt something shift. It was subtle, like a door opening in a dark place. It was subtle, but it was real. Something was listening. Something was hearing her offer. The village did not understand what Adana was doing. The women whispered. They said she was a witch. They said she was feeding something dark. They said she was the reason the hunger had come in the first place. They said she should be cast out, should be sent into the forest, should be burned. The elders began to gather stones. But then, one morning, when the sun had barely risen above the trees, Obi walked out of the forest. He was thin. He was marked with scratches and wounds. His eyes were hollow. His wrapper was torn in places and stained with things that should not stain cloth. But he was himself. The thing that had held him, the hunger that had used him as a vessel, had released him. He walked straight to the center of the village, to the place where the great tree stood, and he gathered the elders. He told them everything, how the hunger had marked him, how Adana had fed him night after night, how she had offered her own will to the darkness, how she had surrendered everything. "My wife saved us," Obi said, his voice breaking. "She took the hunger into herself. She fed it with her own will. She surrendered everything to save the village. And the hunger, the ancient hunger, it understood at last that it was cared for, and it slept." The elders went to Adana's compound, and they found her sitting by the fire. She was not thin, she was not marked, but her eyes had changed. They were the eyes of someone who had seen to the bottom of the darkest well and had not died there. They were the eyes of someone who had chosen the darkness and had survived. "What have you done?" the oldest elder asked. "What needed to be done?" Adana said. Her voice was steady and strong. "The hunger is sleeping now. It is no longer reaching through the forest. It is no longer calling people to come. It is sleeping inside me, and I will keep it sleeping as long as I live. I understand it now. I understand that hunger is just another form of loneliness, and I understand that the only thing that stops hunger is the knowledge that someone cares." The elder reached out to touch her, and then he stopped. He did not know if it was safe. He did not know if the hunger might reach through her and take him too. "How can we be sure?" he asked. "How can we know that you will keep it contained?" Adana stood. "You cannot be sure. You must trust me. And I must live with the knowledge that I will never fully be trusted again. That is the price of my choice." The village let her stay, but they did not embrace her. They kept their distance. She lived at the edge of the hamlet, neither fully inside nor fully outside. She became what the old healer had been before her. When people came to her with sickness, she would heal them. When the hunger tried to reach through them, to mark them, she would feel it and hold it back. She lived to be very old, and her hands never shook again. On certain nights, when the moon is dark, some people in the hamlet of Umen say they can still see Adana at midnight, at the edge of the forest, washing meat in milk. They say she is still holding the hunger back, still keeping it sleeping, and they say that as long as she stands there, the forest will not come to the village, and the hunger will not wake. "The spirits do not forget the cost of their gifts," the elders whispered to their children. "What is planted in desperation must be harvested with understanding." Some women are mirrors, and in their depths, the darkness learns to see itself and accept itself. And some sacrifices are not losses. They are transformations into something the world has never known. Adana learned at last what the old ones had always whispered. The spirits do not forget the woman who surrenders her will, but keeps her strength. The spirits do not forget the one who feeds the darkness with love instead of fear. The spirits do not forget, and neither do the people. They remember. They always remember. Not with gratitude, not with honor, but with a strange and quiet respect that lives in the space between fear and understanding. The woman who washed meat with milk at midnight became a legend, not a hero, a legend. A story mothers whispered to their daughters, a story the elders told to warn the young about the price of power, a story the village told itself to remember that sometimes sacrifice is the only choice left, and sometimes when you choose the darkness, you do not die. You transform. You become something new. You become something necessary.